Hey there, this is Lauren, your sewing buddy, and today I am making this Wearing History 1917 combination underwear and chemise pattern. I'm making the first view. I would love to make the fourth view, but this is an original pattern with instructions briefly annotated, so I'm not really sure how to adjust it to make that fourth view, but the first one is pretty self-explanatory. I'm using cotton lawn from Online Fabric Store, not sponsored, just want to let you know where I got my stuff. And so first off, of course, this has already been pre-washed, but I'm laying it out, making sure my edges are matching up really nicely. I know that Enchanted Rose Costuming and Bernadette Banner have both done combinations. Theirs were an 1890 version, and this one is 1917. This is my first piece I'm making for Costume College. And here the first pattern piece is the front view. So I'm using very short pins going directly into my carpet to pin it down. I've found that is actually really useful, keeps everything nice and straight and locked. Probably don't tell my landlords, but it works. So yeah, the theme for Costume College in 2020 is celebrating women's 100 years of women's suffrage. So women's suffrage era was 19 teens-ish, which is why I am creating the undergarments first for that era. Projects to come, of course, will be the corset, and then the rehearsal dress from Moulin Rouge, the walking dress from Moulin Rouge, a couple of other things probably. I'm making sure everything here is nice and locked down. The pattern itself is only 2 pieces, which is really nice. I think overall I spent 2 hours working on this today, so I think that also included a lunch break. While I'm working on this, I am listening to Bernadette Banner making her combinations, because it's always fun to have somebody making what you're making to inspire you so that it's more like a sew-along. Again, it's not exactly what I'm making, but the general concept is the same. Here I'm using a washable fabric pen to trace the outline of the pattern, because I have run my fabric scissors through pattern paper one too many times, and this one is just like your standard a large sheet of white paper, so I definitely don't want to run my shears through that. I'm not being super exact here, but I am wanting to mark any markings on the pattern. I did not need to do this one I'm doing here though, because that's if you're going to cut that off and do a ribbon strap instead, which I did not, because it's much easier if it's all one piece. I am then going to mark all of they call it a single perforation, it's a dot. This first one I did in a more complicated way than I needed to here I'm just marking the waistline. But I folded the paper up and marked that way. So there will be a revelation to come wherein I realize that I can use a pin to scratch a tiny hole in the perforation marking on the pattern and then just kind of stab my fabric pen through that. And that worked out much better. So while you're watching me figure out all of these things, I guess I can go back to talking about my life right now. My boss is in Paris starting tomorrow, which means I have the store to myself for a week, and she's stressed that she's never left the store with someone who has as little experience as I do, but she's not worried about it, so that's really heartening to hear. And it's still amazing, still love my job. I know I brag about it a lot, but it's nice to have something positive to talk about. I'm just gonna put it that way. And there I am counting out, because the pattern has different sizes, so mine is the 5th size out, so I have to count 5 dots out for those perforation marks to mark them. The fabric itself that I'm using here, I really like, because as long as it's not on a straight grain, it has some give to it. So, as you'll see later when I'm putting the pieces together, if it needs to have a little bit of ease, that's really easy to do. And also hemming the curves was amazingly easy, because I could just stretch it a little bit and sew it down that way. There I am scratching the holes in to mark the perforations. And I believe the purpose of these perforations is simply so that you know where, not only where the seam line should be, but also make sure that you've got your edges matched up properly. Because I did find that when I was piecing them together, I had to adjust a little bit one way or the other to make those dots line up. And now, at long last, it is time to cut this piece out. After I make sure I trace that waistline, it is a nicely curved waistline, as was mentioned in Bernadette Banner's video, although the combinations she was making were more pieces, and also she did insertion lace and all kinds of other things. I'm going to keep it simple because hardly anyone is going to see these. I'll just know that I have the right understructure for the right silhouette. I mean, you're all going to see them when they're done, probably with something under them, because lawn is rather sheer. And here I have failed to cut the notches, but those dots did come in handy for making sure, again, that things were lined up properly. It's a little bit slow going cutting it out. I'm probably being a little bit more precious with it than I need to be. And why bother marking the waistline? Because I am going to gather the waistline like the 3rd and 4th view on the pattern. I just think it's a lot cuter that way, and it will help keep everything nice and smooth so I don't wind up with some large lump of fabric under my corset when I get around to that point. These are all cut on, or these are both cut on the fold. So it's a very good starter pattern as long as you understand the basics. I mean, after you watch me do this, if you've never sewn before, you can probably do this. It's just a matter of tracing it out and sewing it together. Like these combinations or a shift. Oh, here I discovered that because I did the fabric pen the stabby way, it actually went through to the other side. So I didn't have to transfer those dots over. I just had to lay the fabric against more fabric, so I had a good, I could see the line from the other side, and trace that waistline onto the other half, which makes everything a lot easier later on. Minor spoiler, I have ordered beading lace, which is the type of lace that you can weave ribbon through. I don't have it here yet, so I'm not going to get to that point today. But you do get to see the basic construction of these combinations. And laying the fabric out for the second piece, I ordered a little bit more fabric than I needed because I always do, just in case I want to add some ruffles later, or if I mess something up, maybe I can piece together another. That is not the cut on the fold, Lauren. You made a, there you go. There you go. And then this is shaped really nicely so that I'm wasting very little fabric there. The crotch flap kind of fits right in where the neckline on the other piece was. So good job, Edwardian pattern makers, I guess, for letting us use as little fabric as possible. And you can see there's a notch up toward the neckline on this one. That's actually a center back seam, and then it gets a box pleat under it. So you'll see me create that later. I'd like to note that I'm using a lot of restraint here by making the combinations first, because I really want to start on the corset and the rehearsal dress from Moulin Rouge, but I know that having this is going to affect everything else. Not so much, but having this to wear under the corset instead of like a tank top is going to make a good bit of change, and it's just going to feel a lot better, and it's going to be easier to step into the character. Though we all know that Nicole Kidman didn't wear things under her corsets in the movie because, well, I don't know. Corseter rage. But I'm going to be a step more accurate than she was, which movie accuracy is always questionable. One show that does get that right is Carnival Row. It's like fairies in a made-up London-esque city. But they do use corsets there as a way of controlling fairies because they bind their wings. So that part, not so good. But, I mean, they wear things under the corset, so there's a step up. And once again, tracing with the washable fabric pen. I like to use the blue one because it stands out really well against the white. I do also have pink, but actually I'm not sure where the pink one is. And also the blue one seems to work better for me. And there's my I just washed my hair messy part in my scalp, so please forgive that. I also just trimmed off a few inches of my hair because it was looking a little bit scraggly and my boss had mentioned it, so it's happier now. It's a little bit chopped looking because I did just kind of pull it all in front of my face. Well, not in front of my face, but like either side of my face and then cut it off. But it's at least even. It's not undercut or anything fancy like that. But it does feel better, like running a comb through it, which I've done since I filmed this footage. Once again, doing a little tiny scratch through for the single perforations, just to make sure that we get those marked. These I probably don't actually need, because these would be for if I were doing an open crotch pair, so more like a standard chemise or shift where there's no button flap. These, however, are more important. Those are the seam guides. Again, super helpful to have. Always mark your seam line, like even if you're just hand sewing or machine sewing rather, just having that guide to say, okay, this is where the seam needs to be. I, confession time, didn't use this as that this time, because I did French seams, which came in a little bit narrower than the seam allowance that was given with the pattern. But, you know, it still works out because, once again, these don't have to be perfect. I did already make a mock-up for these, though. I used sort of a flannel with blue roses on it. And I think I'm going to keep that and use it as sort of spring and autumn jammies, just to throw on and be a little bit cozy, but not like sweltering. I think those will be really comfy, especially once I get the waist gathered in, which again, just waiting on that lace to come in. And these shoulder dots, those are actually, I think, the most important ones because those are going to keep your shoulder seam like on point. A lot of times that's something that I struggle with. I just get the line a little bit off and then the whole thing is wonky. And that dot I just did there was for the box pleat to make sure that I know how far over that needs to be folded, which it turns out once you sew that center back seam, it does it all on its own anyway. So it's kind of just to make sure that you did the right seam allowance for your center back. And we just collect all of the pins and cut it out, and then I will be ready to start sewing. So many pins. Really locked that down. And I missed one. There we go. And I haven't decided yet if I like that, oh, right, the ever important waistline. I haven't decided if I like having that button flap or if I'd rather it was just like a chemise, but at this point it is what it is, and again, no one's gonna see it except you and me. And hopefully there will be more of you, but regardless, it's going to serve its purpose, which is all that we can ask of our under things. I do really like these shears that I got here, though. They were the better than Ginger $60, and if you still like your Gingers better, we'll buy you a set of those. And but no, they worked out. I am spacing on the name, the brand, but I'm pretty sure you all know the ones I'm talking about. Oh, I've got like a little cross at the top of my head. That's interesting and cute. I'm wearing my classic sarcasm font shirt. I have weaned out most of my clothing to the point where I have my work clothes, and then I have a couple of things I can throw on other times, and then I have a couple of things I can wear for fancy events, and then I have a lot of costuming. So, I mean, if that trend keeps going, I might just have costuming, but I don't think it's going to get to that point. I'm not going to become Zach the Tailor, much as I can dream. But there we go. About 20 minutes and both of my pieces are cut out. Cutting is always the hardest part. And they're making sure that the waistline is transferred over. Once again, I got all of my dots to come through on the other side. So that's the only part I needed to worry about. And then I have a lot left over if I want to add ruffles, or if I decide I've done something wrong here, if I need facing, bias tape, you name it, I've got it there. And then I can just start pinning these together. I think I'm going to start with that center back seam, just because it's going to be easier to do now than when it's all put together already. And once again, I'm doing French seams, so this is going to be the right side. This is with wrong sides together. tucking in that little flap for the pleat. And then I just have to make sure I don't sew through that bit. And get those dots lined up, because once again, they are super handy. And I'm just going to pin, I think, both ends and then one in the middle, because more pins means more chance for deviation. So I'll go put that together and be right back. Oh. Yeah. That was me showing you kind of how the French seam is going to work. So I'm back with my nicely French seamed back seam. I haven't pressed this. I'm probably not going to press anything on here because, again, it's just for me. And then for this back pleat, kind of open that up, lay it out flat, roughly even. Tuck in the top so we have a nice finished edge there. And then realize that you left your pin cushion way over by your sewing machine. So doing all of that again, lay it out nice and flat, keep the edges even, get things nice and smooth. Maybe this is something that would work better if you weren't doing it on your thigh, but this is how I roll. And then pin it in place. Again, one on each edge and one in the middle, just to make sure that I don't lose that little bit of overlap at the top edge, because that's what keeps it from being a hole. And no one likes a hole in the back of their garment. So then I'm going to go stitch that down and be back. I'm not doing any footage on the sewing machine this time, just because it's rough to change camera angles. But there we go, nicely pleated, slightly out of frame. Very nice, smooth little pleat there. Now it's time to put the sides together. And this time there is a right side and a wrong side, so once again we're doing wrong sides together so that we can do a nice little French seam. And I'm just going to pin both of these sides before I step away to the sewing machine to make things quick and easy. And this is where I officially discovered that those dots should line up to keep things all nice and even. Which means that I had to zhuzh things one way or the other to make sure that they did that. And once again, that's why I'm very happy to use the cotton lawn, because it does have that give. This isn't on a straight grain. This is, it's a bias seam, so it has the ability to wiggle one way and the other. You just don't want to do too much, because then you get weird little ripples in your seams. But with a French seam, most of those ripples are going to be on the inside seam, and then the actual finished seam should be much more smooth. I guess since I have time before the lace comes in, I can ask you all, do you think that I should decorate this a lot, or do you think that I should keep it simple and focus more on the outer garments? It would be nice to have some really cute under things, but also it may be better just to get it over and done with and serviceable and move on to the others. But I will do what you all want to see. And the way I work with pinning, where it doesn't quite line up like that and I have to stretch one, is sort of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So go way far ahead to where I know it needs to meet up, pin it, and then step back and kind of fill in the spaces so that everything is fairly even. So I've done the side seams. They are nicely French seamed. I also did the shoulder seams. This flap is going to button up onto the front somehow, one way or another. I'll figure that out once it's more put together, and when I have the waist all bead laced and ribboned and everything. So that's for a later date. Shoulder seams were also done. Waistline goes nicely all the way around, which means it will be very easy to tack some lace on and get that taken care of. The French seam shoulders, that's the only place where those dots actually lined up perfectly with my French seams, so happy with that. Let's go get the rolled hem done, I suppose. That would be the next step around the bottom. Those curves are fun. All right, got the rolled hem done. With that, I think I'm going to say that we are good for today. Please like and subscribe, comment, let me know what you're working on, let me know what you want to see, and I will see you next time.